Two companies, one moon, and the fate of American space dominance hanging in the balance. NASA is riding an enormous wave of momentum. Fresh off the success of Artemis II, they're already deep into preparations for the next phase of their return to the moon. But this is exactly where one of the greatest battles in the history of American space industry begins. A head-on collision between two titans. Artemis III will push NASA to the absolute limits of what they can achieve. Their position as the global leader in space exploration is no longer guaranteed, and the competition is closing in fast. That means an enormous amount of work needs to get done, and there's very little time to do it. The moment the smoke cleared from Artemis II, NASA began assessing the condition of their mobile launch tower. Following heavy damage from Artemis I, it had been reinforced and upgraded with the goal of drastically cutting turnaround times between SLS rocket launches. All the critical components for Artemis III are already complete: the booster engines, the upper stage, and the Orion spacecraft. All that's left is putting them together, and NASA is not wasting a single minute. But there's a serious complication in this next phase, one that is largely outside of NASA's control. For Artemis III, they need more than just SLS and Orion. They need a lunar lander. And this is where things get really interesting. In 2021, SpaceX was awarded a NASA contract to convert the Starship upper stage into a human landing system for Artemis III. It's important to remember that at the time, Starship looked like this: an early prototype that would climb a few kilometers into the sky, fall back down, and attempt to land. Mostly, it would explode. But after one successful touchdown, SpaceX moved on to the next version, Starship Super Heavy, a much larger and slightly more refined prototype. Over the past 3 years, we've watched progressively advanced iterations of this vehicle complete a series of test flights, sending the upper stage on a suborbital trajectory and ending in one of two ways: either the ship failing and coming back down in pieces, or succeeding and landing itself on the waters of the Indian Ocean. There have been more failures than landings, but it's undeniable that the progress has been staggering. And every time, Starship gets a little closer to becoming a truly reliable rocket system. The problem is that, for all its jaw-dropping ambition and unprecedented scale, progress on turning Starship into a vehicle reliable enough to safely land on the moon has been slower than Elon Musk originally promised. In hindsight, that probably shouldn't have surprised anyone. It's kind of his thing. So in May 2023, just days after Starship Super Heavy lifted off for the first time in an attempt to reach orbit and exploded after losing control, NASA awarded a second lunar lander contract. This time to Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos's rocket company, which until then was best known for launching wealthy tourists to the edge of space. But just like SpaceX, they had big ambitions: their own heavy-lift rocket called New Glenn and the lander called Blue Moon. Then, in January 2025, Blue Origin effectively caught up to SpaceX. New Glenn flew for the first time. The test was largely successful, though the booster did explode in mid-air on its way back down. But by November 2025, the second test flight went according to plan from start to finish. The upper stage deployed 2 satellites on a path to Mars, and the booster came down for a soft landing on a floating platform. And just like that, the Battle of the Titans had truly begun. Given where this race currently stands, NASA has made a bold decision. One or both of these landers will be tested on Artemis III. Everything comes down to who can execute on time, and that time is 2027. Here's what that actually looks like. Artemis III will begin much like what we saw on April 1st. A new crew of 4 astronauts strapped into their capsule on top of a giant orange rocket. But this time, their destination will not be the moon. That doesn't mean landing people on the moon has become any less urgent. In fact, NASA is in more of a hurry than ever before. But it does mean the path to a lunar landing has become far more deliberate and nuanced than it used to be. The old plan was simple to the point of being reckless. Fly around the moon on Artemis II, then go straight to landing people on the surface with Artemis III, and basically figure out the details along the way, hoping everything worked once they got there. Not exactly inspiring confidence when human lives are on the line. So the new plan for Artemis 3 involves testing the potential lunar landers in space while staying close enough to Earth that if anything goes wrong, the crew can get home safely. That means alongside the SLS and Orion launch, 1 or 2 additional giant rockets will be lifting off. Let's stay optimistic and assume both lander candidates are ready to fly, because that gives us 2 scenarios to walk through, and both are pretty remarkable. The first thing to launch will be the landers themselves, Starship and New Glenn. Both need to deploy their upper stage landers into low Earth orbit. And this is where the first major challenge begins. Lunar Starship and Blue Moon are so massive that they burn through an extraordinary amount of fuel just getting from Earth to the Moon. If they don't refuel in orbit first, they simply won't have enough propellant to lift the astronauts back off the lunar surface. So as part of Artemis 3, both companies must demonstrate successful in-space refueling. For SpaceX, that means launching a second Starship configured as a fuel tanker. For Blue Origin, that means sending up a dedicated propellant transport vehicle. 2 more giant rocket launches. 2 orbital docking and propellant transfer demonstrations. It may not sound flashy, but no one has ever refueled a spacecraft in orbit before. Doing it twice at once would be one of the biggest leaps in spaceflight history. Assuming all of that checks out, it's finally time for the SLS to launch. It will play out just like Artemis 2, right up until the Orion capsule reaches space. Instead of heading for the Moon, the crew will set course to rendezvous with their first lander. The initial challenge is docking the 2 spacecraft. The lander will fly autonomously, but Orion will have a pilot at the controls, something the crew actually practiced on Artemis 2, when pilot Victor Glover steered the capsule toward its own spent upper stage engine in a mock docking exercise. In Scenario 1, Orion approaches Blue Moon from the side and connects to a docking port on the crew cabin at the bottom of the lander. The upper sections are all fuel tanks, feeding directly into the habitation module. It's not the most spacious interior, but compared to the old Apollo lunar module, the crew is getting considerably more room to move around. Scenario 2 looks quite different. Lunar Starship has its docking port at the nose, so once the crew transfers through, they step into a massive, wide-open flight deck, 9 meters across and several meters tall. There is a luxurious amount of space in there. In either case, once the crew gets settled, it's time to get to work. That means a thorough shakedown of every critical system: life support, power, propulsion, communications. They'll likely undock the landers, practice manual control in orbit, then redock with Orion. The whole point is to find every flaw that needs to be fixed before the next version of the vehicle, the one that will actually land people on the Moon. Because the original Artemis 3 plan had astronauts entering one of these landers for the very first time while already in lunar orbit. That is a terrible place to discover that something isn't working the way it's supposed to. And while inside both landers, the crew will also be trying on their lunar spacesuits in microgravity for the first time. These suits are made by Axiom Space, a completely new design, different from what NASA uses on the ISS and different from anything worn on the Moon during the Apollo era. These suits are designed to make future moonwalkers far more agile and far less clumsy-looking than their predecessors. They've already been tested underwater on Earth, which replicates certain aspects of the space environment. But the real test will come when astronauts take them into the lander's airlock and expose them to the vacuum of space for the very first time. NASA expects all of these exercises to take up to 3 weeks for the crew to complete. So there will be plenty to look forward to once this mission gets off the ground. But while we wait for Artemis 3, there's already significant action happening right here on Earth. In May 2026, SpaceX will test Starship version 3 for the first time from their brand new launch complex at Starbase, Texas. This is the vehicle the company believes is no longer a prototype. It's the first finished product. The first Starship they genuinely believe can take human beings to the Moon. They'll still need to build out the interior with life support systems and everything else required to make this enormous rocket actually livable. But they have a year to get that done. Over at Blue Origin, they also have a historic launch scheduled for May, a test flight of the Blue Moon Mark I prototype. This is a smaller version of their human landing system designed to deliver medium-sized cargo to the lunar surface. The goal for this first test is straightforward: get all the way to the moon and touch down safely. If they pull it off, it will inspire enormous confidence at NASA and transform Blue Origin from a late arrival into a genuine contender. So assuming both companies deliver and Artemis 3 succeeds with 2 landers tested in Earth orbit, it's time to move on to the next epic milestone: an autonomous, uncrewed moon landing. Think of it as Artemis 3.5, because once we've confirmed a lander is safe for people to live inside, we need to see it actually land on the moon. Only then can one company be declared the true winner. And even that is no time to celebrate. NASA wants Artemis 4 to fly within 1 year of Artemis 3. That means whichever company wins will need to be producing landers at a relentless pace, with almost no margin for error. This is how America is going back to the moon. Not just to plant another flag and congratulate themselves on a job well done. This is about total dominance of the lunar environment, because there is another major power with its sights set on the same destination, and they are not coming to play around. China has its own plans for a moon base, and the race is already on.